Speaker recognizes the Honourable Member for Placential West-Bellevue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm certainly glad to have the opportunity to rise today in this honourable House, as I am always pleased to rise to speak to any piece of legislation, but this budget particularly, to give my response to it. As many of my colleagues have already stated, this is not a budget that we are happy about, but it's a budget that has made tough decisions because of the inaction of the previous government. Let's look back, Mr. Speaker, at some of our province's recent history. Our government has been in power for 4 months, and we're prepared to answer for every decision that we've made since we took the reins. And we're prepared to accept and acknowledge that we are asking the public to make some sacrifices and to live with the reality of a difficult budget. But we're not prepared to accept the blame and the result of the mismanagement of the previous government. The decisions that were made in the past 12 years by the PCs while they were in power, it seems like they aren't even willing to answer for those. We've got the crowd opposite, Mr. Speaker, 6 of 7 of them who served in the PC government, and the 7th new one really was in government anyway as a staffer, so we might as well say all 7 of them were in there, Mr. Speaker. And every day they come into question period and they're deriding us for the decisions we take today, and they're refusing to acknowledge their role in bringing us to where we are today. So I think the people of my district and the people of Newfoundland and Labrador are well served, Mr. Speaker, by seeing the full context of the place we are in today. So let's just go back over some facts. In 2003, when the members opposite took over, Mr. Speaker, the province's budget deficit stood at $914 million. And just for a quick reference, our net debt today is $12.6 billion. And it took us 66 years, Mr. Speaker, to get there since we joined Confederation. And if we did nothing, took no action whatsoever, Mr. Speaker, that number would double in the next 5 years. I think it's really important for the people at home, Mr. Speaker, to take into account the gravity of that number, how large that number is, that in 66 years we've arrived to the point where we are today. And if nothing changes, if no measures were taken to mitigate the excessive spending that the members opposite put forward for years and years and years, that in the next 5 years that number would double. Adjusted for inflation, the debt in 2003 was more like $14.27 billion. Government back then surely had a huge problem, facing a tough economic situation. They faced huge pension liabilities and a huge structural deficit and faced mounting debt levels. So naturally, Mr. Williams and company came into power trying to take measures that were necessary to correct the province's course. And interesting enough, Mr. Speaker, we see in the news over the weekend that Mr. Williams was out actually advocating for some of the choices that were made in this past budget and saying that they were the necessary choices. So it's interesting that members opposite aren't so adept now to follow his words as they were for the 10 years of power that Mr. Williams was in. They went to war with Labour. They sacrificed a whole pile of their own political capital at the time to attempt to get the province's finances under control. But then something happened, Mr. Speaker. Something happened. The oil started flowing and the prices started rising, and they rose and rose and rose to the point where Danny Williams and his government at the time, Mr. Speaker, they paid no heed to the financial situation. They spent some more, Mr. Speaker. And that is the result, and those decisions are the product of where we are today. They had so much cash coming through, Mr. Speaker, they didn't know what to do with it. They just put it out through the door, and they couldn't spend it fast enough. With oil royalties and Atlantic Accord payments combined, they had their hands in some $25 billion, Mr. Speaker. And how many doors did I go to and all the members of this chamber go to last year? And the question on people's minds were, what happened to it? Where did the money go, Mr. Speaker? Where did the $25 billion go? Because no one seems to know. It's gone, and today we are left with a huge mess to deal with. They blew all the money, and even when prices were high, they posted a surplus budget only 3 years. And that's the definition of mismanagement, in my opinion, Mr. Speaker. High oil prices gave them a few more surpluses that they didn't even expect. They weren't planning for those, Mr. Speaker, only for the price of oil went up so far. Otherwise, they'd have even more deficits. Their spending was out of control even when oil was at its peak. They cut taxes for the rich and implemented all kinds of giveaways and goodies meant to keep voters on their side. And it's interesting, Mr. Speaker, in this budget it is proposed that the highest income brackets will be going back up 3% to 18.3%, Mr. Speaker. The 18.3%. That the highest income brackets will rise by 3%. The last time that number was comparable was in 2001, Mr. Speaker, when the Liberals were last in power. Successively from that point forward, the former administration kept reducing them, and reducing them. And in the same time that they were reducing taxes for the rich, Mr. Speaker, they were flatlining taxes for the lowest income people, and they were doing nothing to stimulate the economy for those with less money, Mr. Speaker. They continued to lower taxes for their buddies and the rich people, Mr. Speaker, and right now we are taking action to correct those changes. They did absolutely nothing to tackle the financial situation that confronted them at the start of their government. They tried at the beginning, but they failed miserably, Mr. Speaker, and they continue then a path forward to where we are today, to where they have spent on nearly every dollar the province had. They thought they won the lottery. They had billions in oil money blowing through their coffers, and they could afford to wait another year, another 5 years, another decade to sort out the financial mess. But as long as the oil was pouring in, what did it matter, Mr. Speaker? What did it matter? Well, we all know what happened, Mr. Speaker, and they'll tell you that they didn't see it coming. They didn't see the drop in oil prices coming, as if the economic history of oil as a commodity has always shown a trend of positive growth. If this crowd wasn't aware that oil is a volatile commodity that's subject to the whims of global market forces, then they weren't qualified to run this province, Mr. Speaker. And after 12 years in power, the people made that conclusion and ushered them out in favour of strong fiscal accountability and strong management. So here we are, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to put some things in context, and I think I've done that now. And so here we are today. This is 2016, and the money's been spent, the debt has been increased, and the cupboard, Mr. Speaker, is bare. The members opposite left the cupboard bare when we came into power, and they wouldn't even tell us what the true facts were before the election. Our current Premier sent a letter to the former Premier September 28 of last year asking for an updated fiscal statement, and we couldn't get any facts. So we went into an election with a understanding that the deficit was at $1.1 billion, only to come in here and find out that number was nearly $2 billion. Not $2 million, $2 billion. Mr. Speaker, that number today would be nearly $3 billion. $3 billion, Mr. Speaker. Now, if that's not the definition of mismanagement, I don't know what is, Mr. Speaker. They left this place in an awful, awful mess, and now we've begun to clean up. We recognise that the revenue measures in this budget are not easy. And, Mr. Speaker, since the budget has come down, I have made a point to travel through my district to speak to constituents. I have a very large rural district stretching from Marystown and the Browne Peninsula right up to Goobies, and over to Long Harbour and Norman's Cove, Long Cove, edging onto the Avalon Peninsula. I have a very large district, and I've made a very point on the weekends when the House is not in session to go back into my district, attend as many functions that I can fit into my schedule, as many meetings that we can get to, and talk to the people of my district. And I know that these are difficult choices. They are difficult choices to accept. They are difficult choices to think that we had $25 billion worth of oil royalties in the last decade, and where has it gone? And why are we coming back to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador now and saying that we all have to be part of the solution to help get us out of this mess? We've begun the clean-up, and we recognise these measures are not easy. But the alternative, Mr. Speaker, allowing debt levels to reach such a point that interest payments become the largest portion of our budget, that's just not something that we can accept. And I don't think that's something that the people of my district or the people of the province can accept. And yes, there will be debate on what measures should or should not have been taken, but, Mr. Speaker, something had to be done. And there are many measures that I believe the people of the province know that we had to take because of the mess that was left by the other side, Mr. Speaker. As I said, The debt that we have today that took 66 years to accumulate would have doubled in the next 5 years if spending was allowed to continue, and that is not a reality that we could live with. So we're more or less now back to square one. We're right back to where the other crowd started in 2003, and we will succeed where they failed. Our budget, difficult as it is honest and presents a credible and a sensible plan for returning to surplus and for easing the financial strain on the Treasury. This is not a problem that we got into overnight, Mr. Speaker, and it's not a problem we're going to get out of overnight. That is why we're taking a sensible approach to tackling this issue over the long term. Our creditors and our credit raters recognize this, and so do members of our public service. And speaking of the credit rating, Mr. Speaker, I know there's been a lot of comparison to the Alberta budget. Well, actually, Dominion downgraded their credit rating after their budget, and our credit raters maintained our ratings. So clearly, the banks are responding positively to our messages. There's nothing in the budget that is left to chance, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, oil prices could shoot back up to $140 a barrel, and that's something that members opposite would certainly count on. They would plan a budget, Mr. Speaker, that counts on the price of oil going up, rather than banking on what it actually is and planning sustainably for that. And that would be very timely for us, certainly, as the Browne project is scheduled to come online in a year or two. And I'm very proud to say that in my district of Placential West-Bellevue, we've been very intricately involved in the Browne project. The DSM module was just constructed in Marystown, finished up in the end of December, employing some 1,300 people, and I actively now in my role continue to work with the site owner to see what the next steps are for the people and the workers in Marystown. And of course, that was shipped to Bull Arm, which is also in my district, Mr. Speaker, where thousands of people commute to every single day, creating economic wealth here in the province. And so my district is very integral to the Browne project. But our budget, Mr. Speaker, is designed to assume that we will have to deal with low commodity prices for the foreseeable future, which is more than we can say for the members opposite, who continue to bank on oil prices that just weren't there. Our budget doesn't bury its head in the sand or ignore problems that we face or hope for the forces of history to turn in our favour. I can tell you, and I think the member from Mount Pearl North said this last week, and I appreciated the comment. He said, I don't think anyone on either side of the House enjoys this budget or sitting through this proceeding. I have to commend the member from Mount Pearl North for that statement, and I think he's right. I think he's right. I don't think anyone is taking pleasure in this, and I don't expect him to say that too often. But I think he's right on that point. I think no one takes pleasure in this. No one takes pleasure in this, and we regret that we are in this position. And we wish that the crowd opposite perhaps would take a little more accountability for the decisions they made. But wishes and regrets, Mr. Speaker, they're not going to fix this problem. Only action can fix this problem, and that is what this budget begins. It's our first steps and our first actions taken to correct the province's untenable financial situation. And as difficult as this budget is, it does contain some positive measures, which have been totally outweighed in the commentaries from the opposition and in the media. So I'm going to spend some time helping to inform my constituents here today who are watching at home that there are some positive measures that they should know about, Mr. Speaker. For instance, the budget contains a new Newfoundland and Labrador income supplement, which would be a quarterly payment to low-income residents of the province. This new income supplement is intended to take care of these people, the people who need our help most, and to lessen the tax burden on them. So for a single earner family of 2 adults and 2 children under 6 of a net income of $40,000, they would receive an average annual supplement of $910, Mr. Speaker, and a quarterly installment of $227. In addition to the income supplement, Mr. Speaker, there's also what we're calling the seniors benefit, and it will be paid to qualifying seniors in addition to the new Newfoundland and Labrador income supplement. So I just give an example. I've had a lot of seniors call me concerned about the impact of the budget on them, and I think it's very important that they know the facts and get the information that will help them. So I give you an example, Mr. Speaker, of a senior couple making $26,000. they would stand to gain $250 on the seniors benefit and another $510 from the income supplement. That's a net gain, Mr. Speaker, and that is a benefit to seniors in our province, the seniors, the very seniors who helped build our province and our communities into what it is today. And those facts aren't known out there, and I encourage anyone in my district to reach out to my office and to call us for any information that they want. We have access that we can calculate what it is they need and in terms of what benefits that they have. So they can reach my office at 891-5607. It's like an infomercial here today, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly encourage them to do that because I think the more information that we can get out there, the less fear that will be out there. And I don't think there's any benefit to anyone in the province to have a whole pile of fear there. The facts will be the facts, and we can debate the facts as they are. But to just promote fear for its own sake, Mr. Speaker, I find extremely problematic. We really mean it, Mr. Speaker, when we say that looking after the most vulnerable in our society was one of the biggest considerations in this budget. And each revenue measure in this budget was carefully considered with that in mind. Another thing of this budget, Mr. Speaker, it brings taxation back to a sustainable, structurally sound level. Of course, increasing taxes is the last thing that we want to do as a government. I believe the member for Stephenville Port-au-Port said it. You know, he just got here. He spent years working in his career. He came here to make a difference, and the last thing you want to do is come into in a new government and have to raise taxes. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite didn't leave us a whole lot of choices. They didn't leave a whole lot of tools in our toolbox, and unfortunately, we are having to make very tough decisions. And after 10 years of Tory tax cuts and giveaways, our Treasury has a structural revenue problem. We have a shortfall. For years, the Tories have plugged this hole with oil money, banking on oil money that oftentimes wasn't there. But we don't have that luxury anymore, and we will not continue to plan based on oil prices that may or may not rebound. Even though the personal income tax levels, Mr. Speaker, are being raised in this budget, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians will still pay less in taxes than they did in 2006-2007, which was the beginning of the drop in the tax rates and the tax cuts that clearly the people of Newfoundland and Labrador could not afford in the long term. Another decision made by the previous government that was unsustainable. There are also a number of initiatives in the budget that will improve the lives of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. We're still spending $8.48 billion in this budget. Money will still be flowing, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very proud to say that I will be helping communities in my district to access the funding that they qualify for the enhancement and development of those communities, which includes $570 million in infrastructure spending. This means spending on infrastructure assets that will benefit people across the province. There's almost $64 million in there earmarked for the widening and the paving of the Trans-Labrador Highway, which is something that was long neglected from the previous government. And whenever I hear about the Trans-Labrador Highway, it's reminiscent of Humber Valley paving and the fact that they didn't do a whole lot with it. Humber Valley paving. There's $9.3 million for the completion of the Placential Lift Bridge, which is just adjacent to my district. The people of my district in the Long Harbour area and certainly the Chapel Arm and Norman's Cove area would use some services and fish out of Placentia, and this is a very important investment for that area. There's $72.7 million allocated for approved multi-year capital works projects, including municipal capital works for communities across Newfoundland and Labrador. There's $88 million allocated for education infrastructure projects and a further $16 million for repairs and maintenance. These are investments that will benefit the people in our province now and for more years to come. Another big area of investment in this budget, Mr. Speaker, is the $431 million towards the pension liabilities for retired and retiring members of the public service. So obviously there are a lot of measures contained in this budget, Mr. Speaker. And I'll wrap up by restating that we are aware that it's a difficult budget. I personally am very aware of that, and I am open to talk to any of my constituents at any time, any place they so choose. And anyone who wants to reach out to me should email me or send me a message, and I will certainly get back to them in short order, and I will explain whatever facts that they want to. We simply can't allow things to continue as they've done for the last dozen years, and we refuse to be in the position of looking back 12 years from now at this opportunity, at the moment of the start of a new government, and saying that we could have acted, we should have acted, but we didn't act, Mr. Speaker. And it's very important for me as a new MHA that I continue to discuss with my constituents. I know they've been emailing me and contacting me. I haven't. I've been responding to all of them and phoning them back, oftentimes here until 10:30 at night, calling them, and I encourage them to continue doing that. And anyone who wants to reach out to me is free to do so. So, Mr. Speaker, my time is expiring and I look forward to speaking again. Thank you.